Hi, I'm Rob Langton from Development Ready. Our interview series delves into the lives of Australia's most respected property thought leaders and decision makers and uncovers what makes them tick. This is The Interview. Our next guest this morning is David Kobritz, Executive Chairman and Managing Director of Deal Corporation. David, thanks so much for your time. Walk us through your upbringing in Melbourne. Where did you grow up and what are some of your earliest childhood memories?
Well, I was born in Melbourne in the early 50s. My parents migrated to Australia in 1951 from China, and they had a Russian background and lived in China pre-war. Grew up mainly in Beaumaris. My father was a mad fisherman and he was out in the water half the week, I think, at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd join him about 10 o'clock after I woke up. He was also with close friends and business colleagues involved in property as well. And as a young kid, I can remember sitting in the back of the car while they'd go out looking at properties around the eastern suburbs or southeastern suburbs of Melbourne and listening in. So I guess property was embedded in my psyche at a pretty young age.
Now, as I understand it, you studied a Bachelor of Urban Planning at the University of Melbourne, which you completed around 1974. Why did you study that and what did you learn from that degree?
Well, I actually started architecture. I wanted to be an architect, but after starting architecture, a year of that quickly fixed me and said, no way do I want to be an architect. And the urban planning school at Melbourne Uni was in its infancy, so I had a look at that and I thought, well, we'll give that a go. And that was an interesting exercise because mainly it taught you the discipline of all the regulations and so forth, but also it was really a course that got you prepared to work for government, whether it was the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works back those days as the main planning authority or a council, and that didn't particularly interest me, but I completed the degree and then went into planning and project management.
And how long were you in that sort of field? I know we'll get into the origins of Deal Corp shortly, but how long were you involved in that career and that position?
For probably mid-70s to about mid-80s. I was working for consultants and then for my own project management and planning firm, and did a lot of work at the time for Coles while they were establishing Kmarts and so forth around Victoria, and a number of developers as well. So got involved quite early days in putting projects together and giving planning and design and project management advice, and quickly made up my mind that I wanted to be in the development space rather than the consulting space.
And you went and did that with the launch of Deal Corporation in around 1984. What was the impetus for starting the business and what was your mandate back then for development?
I was actually in a client's office and I met a fellow there, and we got to know one another quite well, and he gave me the impetus to go out on my own and actually undertake development, and he became a close friend and a backer for the next decade or so. It was a time where we saw opportunities in the early days of mainly refurbishing existing buildings, a lot of residential buildings, a lot of old blocks of flats in those days that were built in the 50s and 60s in Melbourne that were quite tired, and we could buy the whole block and undertake renovations, strata title and sell them. So we did that for about 5 or 6 years, and then we also, in the mid to late 80s, we earmarked the office market, but particularly the suburban office market is a market that had a lot of potential and growth, and we got involved in developing quite a few suburban offices at the time.
And give us an idea of Melbourne in the 1980s. How different was it to today, and how different was the actual process of developing?
Well, I think the development game then was far simpler. I mean, a number of examples. I don't think we ever went to VCAT. You'd go to the local council and sit down with the planner, and you'd have 3 or 4 or 5 meetings. You'd virtually pull out the tracing paper and you design the building with the planner, and you'd get your permit, and there was nothing like pre-sales in those days. If you were building apartments, got the permit, got the builder, got the finance, and you started building. We sold as we built, and whatever was left over, you'd sell 3, 4, 5 months after completion. So today, of course, you've got to go through this massive, expensive process of pre-sales and marketing that adds millions of dollars of cost to every project. And of course then you'd have your architect, your engineer, and maybe 1 or 2 other consultants. But today you need a football team of consultants and reports that are a mile high, and to ensure you tick all the boxes of the regulators. I don't know whether they're ever read, but you've got to produce them. And the other aspect, of course, is we'd build 7 days a week. There was no such thing as 9-day fortnights, and so the whole process was far simpler, far quicker, and over the decades the industry's just become so over-regulated, and that it's actually a highly inflationary system, given the cost of the creation of a project from the time we acquire it right through the planning and sales process to eventual completion. The hard work is done before we actually start building. That's the easy part.
And just on that, how much of an impact do you think all those costs that you have to carry, the taxes and the regulations and that sort of thing, how much of an impact does that have on housing affordability?
I don't know whether anyone's actually sat down and done the numbers, but it would add an enormous amount, whether it's 20%, 30% or more to the cost of a project. It's just the time it takes to go through the planning process that can take 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes even longer. The pre-sale process, the marketing process, and often, a project that perhaps we could have done in 2 or 3 years in the 80s would today take at least double that amount of time.
Take us through the growth of Deal Corp as a business. What are some of the more notable projects you've developed over the years?
We've really concentrated on opportunity and location. We've always said the secret's in the buying. You've got to have patience. You've got to buy well, and you can't chase the market in terms of, even if it's a rising market, you can't keep chasing it because the market can turn very quickly. So our projects have been largely in Melbourne because that's our home base and we know the market very well. And it's been a spread from CBD, refurbished buildings for apartments or new apartment buildings, through to inner city, through to outer suburban, but it's very much concentrated in areas where we feel we know the market and we're comfortable with the market, and if the market turns, that location will still stand up reasonably well as against some areas where there might be overdevelopment or the margins in terms of price decreases could be quite significant.
And take us through the Deal Corp business today in terms of who's involved in the business and where are some of those projects located that you're either marketing now or that have recently been completed?
We've got a very tight-knit group in the office. We really see ourselves as a management company. We see property as a very big, complex jigsaw puzzle that needs careful day-to-day management that's got to be brought together. So we've got a team of in-house development managers, in-house sales and marketing, obviously the finance side, the accounting side and the administration side, but everything else is outsourced in terms of our principal consultants and construction. We got a variety of projects. We've got about 14, 15 projects on our books at the moment, and they may vary from we've got the development rights through the state government authorities on two of the railway station sites where the level crossings have been removed and the stations have gone below ground. One is Gardner Station in Burke Road, Glen Iris. We'll be building, commencing in January next year with 118 apartments and some retail on the ground level facing onto the station plaza. Also got the development rights for Ormond Station in North Road, Ormond, and we've recently got planning approval there for about 290 dwellings plus 7,000 square metres of retail, so wrapping around the station. So that will probably go ahead in 12 to 18 months. And then there are other, had a project that's now been going 9 years out at Bundoora, Plenty Road, Bundoora, where we bought an 11-hectare site from the state government, former Larundel Psychiatric Hospital site. It's got two common frontages with La Trobe University, and it's a 14-stage project, mixed use of, again, retail, residential, new residential, refurbishment of some heritage buildings and some commercial there. And we've completed now, we're just about to complete our 10th stage, and we've got 2 more stages to run.
So at any one time, you've got anywhere between 5 to 15 projects on the go, ranging in value between $30 to $300 million. What are the fundamentals you consider when analysing an opportunity?
You've got to buy well. You can't put a noose around our neck from day one and hope the market rises. So it's really comes down to the real disciplines of property in terms of the right location, where we see the growth in the market, whether it be residential or commercial, and the risk from a planning point of view, because that has become a major risk today given the complexity of the controls.
And in which sectors are you seeing, you mentioned there, opportunity and growth, so in which sectors are you seeing the most opportunity at the moment?
Well, we've had a large concentration on the residential sector, the inner, middle, suburban multi-unit market, whether it be townhouses or apartments. I still think, given the demographics of our society and the ageing population, that is still a growth market. It's certainly been tempered by the projected decrease, or not decrease in the growth of population, which is we're starting to experience now and will continue to experience in the next few years, and the decrease in investors. But I think, given the structure of our society where there's so much invested by families in their home, that's generally their key asset. And in many, many circumstances, that asset needs to be liquidated for various reasons, and the family doesn't need the big family home, whether it be, you know, in the outer suburbs or the inner suburbs. And the growth of the value of that asset has been so substantial in the last decade that has created the opportunity in a way to liquidate and change a lifestyle.
And given that then, are there any sectors that you're avoiding at the moment?
Oh, it's not really avoiding, it's just really you've only got a certain number of hours in a day, so you can't look at every sector. But the world's just changes so quickly, the economy changes so quickly that every project has got to have the flexibility to change with it, whether it's the size of apartments that we're building or the design aspect or actual change of use within a project.
You gave a webinar, I think, around a month or 2 months ago where you spoke about Australia and Melbourne being an attractive destination for development. You've been developing here for some 36 years. What is it that you think Melbourne offers from a property developer perspective?
Well, I think diversity. I think it's an extremely attractive city to live in. It offers almost everything you can get anywhere around the world. It offers great education for both tertiary and secondary education. That's a huge attraction for people to come to Melbourne. Lifestyle in Melbourne is fantastic, from sporting, culture. It's easy to get to our rural areas, whether it's the beach or the hills and so forth around Melbourne. So I think it's, and of course it's now reached a stage where with a population of 5 million people, it's almost self-perpetuating in that respect. Whether it reaches 8 million people, whenever that's projected, is another question altogether. But I think now government has also going to improve the quality of life in Melbourne with the investment in infrastructure that's already commenced and the programs in place for that to continue.
And as I mentioned, you've been developing for over 35 years now, so you would have seen a lot of new market entrants, a lot of new property developers come into the space over the past 10 to 20 years. How are you finding the process of site acquisition? Is it a lot more competitive now than it was 20 years ago, and how do you navigate through that?
Yeah, well, there are many more players. You know, every second person you run into is a developer. Until probably the last 6 or 12 months, you need a lot of patience, and you've got to be cautious. And as I said earlier, you got to be careful how much you pay for sites. And we've had a lot of developers enter the market and syndicates enter the market, and they might have a different agenda than we would as a traditional developer. You know, from our point of view, we don't need to acquire more sites. If we've got 15 projects today, that's going to keep us busy for the next 4 or 5 years. So my attitude is just be patient. If the right project comes along, that's fine. But the other aspect, of course, is because we've got a reputation for delivery and integrity in the marketplace built up over that period of time for 36 years, we get offered a lot of opportunities off-site.
And how are you finding the lending environment at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's difficult. I think we're in an era where of zero risk or minimal risk. So we've seen the major banks pull right back from the development space, and we've seen the growth of the second-tier lenders, the private equity markets, and that's probably here to stay. And they've got a large slice of the market now, and will probably have an increasing slice of that market. I think we've also seen the super funds enter the development space, either on their own accord or through joint ventures, and that'll be a growth area as well. Of course, we're in an era of very low interest rates. I mean, I've never seen it in my working life, and I've seen more at the other end of the scale than where we are at the moment. So that all makes me a bit nervous as how long can we sustain these low interest rates. But it looks like they're here for a while longer, and that's of course, encourages more investment, and of course people taking the opportunity to upgrade or change their lifestyle as well.
So David, I wanted to ask you, as I mentioned, you've been in business for a long period of time. Take us through the most challenging periods in the history of Deal Corp. When were they, and how have you managed to navigate your way through difficult economic periods?
We've probably been through three, I think, major downturns in the 36 years. Of course, the late 80s, early 90s, when interest rates were through the roof at 18-20%, and it was the early days of the company, and we had projects on the go then, and fortunately we built up a portfolio of investments at the same time, and between some projects that we had to liquidate, we were fortunate enough to have substantial equity in our investments to be able to carry the pain on the one side and maintain the business and the potential growth of the business. So that was a difficult, probably 4 or 5 year period. But as we came out of it, there was tremendous opportunities because we purchased existing buildings at well below replacement value, and they were largely office buildings. We refurbished those, and that created the platform for the next round of growth for the business. And then the GFC period, a decade or more ago, again, we had a number of projects, and we had finance in place for those projects, and then suddenly the finance was withdrawn on 2 or 3 of those projects. So that set the company back in terms of being able to proceed, but at the same time gave us a little bit of breathing space to reset things and refinance things, and we grew from there. And in the last year or two, we've seen not only the COVID period, but even preceding the COVID period, where the industry was going through a credit squeeze in 2018, 2019. And finance was much harder to get, and then of course we've had COVID since then, and we've not only, from a development aspect, that has slowed down and construction has slowed down or been delayed, but our rental income portfolio also suffered, and we've spent half our time dealing with tenant issues in the last 6 months and assisting our tenants through this period. Now, that's an ongoing matter that we're dealing with almost on a daily basis, and I expect that's going to continue well into 2021 before we see any, hopefully, satisfactory resolution.
That segues nicely into my next question, which is, you were vocal earlier in the year in relation to large corporates refusing to pay rent, even at discount rates. How do you navigate this challenge, and have you found corporate tenants more willing to repay the rents back to the properties now that we're later in the year?
I mean, our experience by and large was there might have been a period of try-on between landlords and tenants earlier in the year. And now, by and large, the communication's back to where it should be. Tenants are explaining their situation, providing the evidence, and as long as the communication is there, we can deal with that and we can assist where we can. I think where there's been lack of communication, that's caused the problems.
Now, no doubt over the past 3 decades that you've been in business, there's been opportunities to expand interstate, in particular, no doubt, to Sydney. Why have you always stuck to Melbourne when we've seen a few other developers that have been in business for the same period of time often expand into Sydney?
I think we've been extremely busy in Melbourne for the last, call it 15 years. And there's only a certain number of hours in a day, and if I was 10 or 20 years younger, I probably would have taken that step. But given I'm not 10 or 20 years younger and we've been very busy in the Melbourne market, that's been our concentration.
Reflecting on your career, what would you say are your proudest achievements?
I think really our reputation in the industry, the integrity, we do what we say we do. We do what we say we will do, and we deliver. And sometimes things can get difficult or delayed in this market, but we really stick to our guns and make sure that we deliver on every project, and we're there for whether it's our tenants or our clients as purchasers. If there are issues, we're always there to assist.
What's the best deal and what's the worst deal that you've done?
I suppose there were a couple of projects in the early 90s that cost us quite a bit of money in the downturn. In terms of best deals, well, you know, often I'll reflect the building we're sitting in now. We built 12, 13 years ago here in Cremorne. We bought this site at 6,000 a metre, at 6,000 square metres. We paid 1,200 a metre. And we did quite well out of it. And this is one of a number of examples. Today, the site would probably be valued at close to 15,000 a metre. So we might have done far better doing nothing and sitting on our haunches. And there's quite a few examples of that. But that's all, you know, at a point in time when a market's been rising. There are other points in time where the market hasn't gone that way. So, we did, I recall we did in the late 80s, when I talked about the suburban office market, we bought 5 or 6 sites in the inner east of Melbourne, and I think we only developed one of them because the price was rising so rapidly. We got our permit and sold them very quickly for very little investment. So they were pretty good deals back then.
Now, for developers watching this or aspiring developers, what would be your 2 or 3 key pieces of advice that you could potentially pass on?
Need a lot of patience. Don't jump in on a whim. Do your research. And make sure the pockets are deep enough to get through a downturn or a slowdown.
Now, 2 questions to finish. One, outside of property development, you're heavily involved in horse racing and have been for some time. Take us through where this interest originated from and how the passion has grown over the years that you've been involved.
Well, it stems from my university days, where I had a few mates who were involved in, like going to the races, and I didn't know one end of a horse from another, but we used to go there to have a few drinks and a good time and chase a few girls, and one day, 5 or 6 years after uni finished, we got together and we ended up with a relatively inexpensive horse that won 9 races in town. So we were well and truly hooked. But so during the 80s, I had interest in a few horses, and then met Lee Friedman when he moved from Sydney to Melbourne in the 80s, and Lee convinced me to take a quarter share in a grey horse that he'd bought in 1988, and that horse turned out to be Sub-Zero that won the Melbourne Cup in 1992. So I should have given it away after that, but you go through that experience, you want to relive it time and time again.
As you mentioned there, you've had success in Group 1 races and other prestigious races. What does it take to win the Melbourne Cup, and what's the feeling like post-win?
What's it take to win a Melbourne Cup? I mean, a lot of luck. 99% luck and some good management by the trainer and jockey, I guess. I think, racing's changed dramatically from those days to today, where it's far more internationalised. We're importing horses, or the industry's importing horses, or you can go and buy horses anywhere in the world to race here, so it's dramatically different. The feeling of winning a race like that is incredible. You just, you hope you've got the right horse that's been trained to the minute, and everything goes right on the day. So it's all got to fall in place. It's like the property jigsaw puzzle that's eventually got to come together for a successful development.
David, that's a good note to end on. Thanks so much for your time this morning, and thanks for sharing your insights. Pleasure to have you on.